is that the mix of policies at the moment, or at least what we know ex ante about the preferences which have been expressed by the people in sort of the campaign circles
Increased
and now this thing is almost certainly for net increased fiscal spending, for tighter immigration control, which will obviously matter to labor supply, and certainly on tariffs, which we believe, at least in the first instance, is certainly inflationary as far as the US economy is concerned. So I think all of that does add up to a more inflationary mix. Now, to what extent does that get calibrated by a less accommodative, let's put it that way, less accommodative Fed policy, and like you said, on the energy complex itself, like greater production in the US. How does that counterbalance what could potentially be either higher supply risk, depending upon how the Middle East turns out, or lower supply risk if there is actually a resolution to that issue. So a lot of uncertainty again, just like in energy, like with everything else, which will determine as to where we land up from here. But certainly my bias would be to think that markets ex ante will have to price it. In fact, let me put it this way. I think the fact that we haven't seen break-even inflation or inflation swaps in the US price in a lot more than what they have already is part of why I would argue that Trump 2.0 is not yet necessarily priced in.
Oh, wow. And then I suppose, what does that mean as far as the upside risk to inflation for this region? You know, dealing with that sort of case by case, with central banks, how to react to that, and then the impact on regional currencies.
So, I mean, I guess as always, different strokes as far as individual central banks and countries are concerned. But I think there are more cross currents and offsetting factors here, because tariffs could well end up being a lot more disruptive and damaging on growth, and which would mean your negative output gaps widen out for a lot of this part of the world. On the other hand, could be inflationary depending upon where sort of energy prices either go, or alternative issues like currency weakness, which could feed back in for some countries more than it would be for elsewhere. So I think it won't be necessarily a common thematic, but certainly one where, again, I would argue the mix of growth and inflation will likely lead to widening inflation gaps between US and this part of the world. Part of what then feeds back, to my mind, into more currency weakness.